Hello. Thank you for your patience earlier this week. We are back. I am doing the stream that was supposed to be on a Wednesday on a Friday. That means it'll show up on YouTube over the weekend. Thank you to everyone who is watching live and to everyone watching on the feed later on over on YouTube or Twitch VOD. As a note, I will be not streaming at least this coming Wednesday the 11th, and I will possibly not be back on Wednesday the 18th because I am moving. I'm going to try and have some other stuff into the Patreon feed along the way, but if it's a bit light on the ground for the next couple of weeks, I beg your indulgence because moving is a big, very disrupting thing in life. And know that all I want to do is get the move done and get back to doing game design and all of the other things that I do with the Patreon, streaming here and stuff like that. So we are here today to talk about environments. Specifically, I wanted to hone in on higher tier environments, right? So tier 3, tier 4. And part of this is just because I need to make some tier 4 environments for my environment book, which I have tentatively scheduled for the fall, maybe late summer. Let me take a drink here. If I did not have the Drakkenheim project, I would probably be trying to put out books much more quickly. But I do, and it's a great project, but it's taking up a lot of my time, and so it doesn't leave me a ton of time to do some of this other work, which then means that I'm having to space out releases a bit more to not kind of overwhelm myself. Environments. The other thing that's going to be useful with that is in May or June, the Daggerheart Hope and Fear supplement will come out, and that is going to have some new environments. I can then look at that book and see what are some high tier environments that still haven't been covered by official material between Core and Hope and Fear. And there are a few different environment supplements, right? There's Wondrous Environments that many of you are familiar with because I interviewed Gethin for the YouTube channel. At Entertainment, I do not remember the specific number that that Darrington has said. I think it's listed on the website. I'm trying to check it really quick. Okay. This just the Daggerheart.com pre-order page says 130 plus adversaries, environments, and 4 new campaign frames. I think that's 130 between adversaries and environments. If I remember correctly, I thought that it was about 20 something environments, maybe just 20. Do not quote me on that. I do not represent Darrington in this. I can't speak for Darrington in terms of the details of that project. I'm just trying to relate what I recall. Okay. So that said, the other thing we need to do is move this down over here because, as with all of our things, this is not official content of Darrington Press or Critical Role. I was one of the designers of Daggerheart, but all these streams are just me speaking from my own personal perspective and my own ideas, and we are using the CGLs we can tell from this cool bottle over there. So we're going to figure out which of these we want to do, right? A Fallen Citadel, I'm thinking, is like kind of Demon Castle Fortress. Arcane Vortex would be like a magical anomaly. Planar Incursion would be like invasion from another plane or dimension. I've also thought possibly about the idea of Arcane Vortex and Planar Incursion being linked, right? That you could have an Arcane Vortex environment that then leads to a Planar Incursion, right? So we'd have a 2-phase environment. In Daggerheart Core, there's only one multi-phase environment. It's the Pitched Battle to Castle Siege pairing. So that could be interesting. And then divine audience, I'm thinking of as like a social encounter, right? It's the you literally go and meet a god. So what I think we should do, and also a note here, I have some stock art I think that would work for Arcane Vortex. So using having an Arcane Vortex would be very handy because that will help control my art costs. These Daggerheart supplements are doing really well, which means that I have more latitude to commission new art, but I'll be able to kind of get everything up and running in terms of having a whole product line more easily if I'm still finding places to use high quality stock art where I can, because that will bring the average costs down, right? If I have, let's say, 30 environments in a book and I have 6 illustrations and I commissioned 4 of them and then I use 2 for stock art, well, that takes me up to one piece of art for every 5 environments, right? So that proportion gets better without the costs being too much higher. So all of that said, now we're going to move on and we're going to start making an Arcane Vortex. Tier 4 event. So what I think I want to do here is we're going to make the Arcane Vortex a campaign endgame environment. And here I am taking as my template the Divine Usurpation environment, which is a tier 4 environment from the core rulebook. And the thing with Divine Usurpation is that it has features that says basically like, here's the long-term project phase of this, and then when the adversary who wants to usurp the gods completes that project, we move into this other mode. So it's almost like a multi-phase environment within one environment. But what I want to do here is unpack that process a little bit more fully so that there's an Arcane Vortex. What's going on? So maybe this is actually also... Maybe this is an exploration environment, and then the planar invasion or planar invasion is an event environment. Right, so we can have not just a phase change, but a type change, right? Here is this place where there's been an Arcane Vortex and things are going on, then something happens with it, and we get a planar invasion. Hello, Jaybird Things. I'm glad that you're here live. So if this is a exploration environment, it also helps make it easier for me to think about differentiating the two of them instead of event 1, event 2. I think description, what I'm going to do is to just write myself a brief, almost, this is like the brief for the Arcane Vortex, right? So a hidden nexus of planar confluences, dangerous, alluring, and containing potential for right. And so the idea here is that there has been a Arcane Vortex in this setting for some time. But if you do something to or with or at the Arcane Vortex, you can create the conditions for a planar invasion. And specifically, I'm thinking of right? So planar invasion, I'm thinking like interdimensional locusts, right? We would be using Outer Realms adversaries as potential adversaries, especially in the planar invasion. The other thing that I can do, and this is a bit cheeky, but I don't think it's too cheeky to do, is that I have adversary, at least one adversary in Menagerie of Mayhem that we could use in the Planner Invasion, right? I'd need to pull up the document to remember exactly how I named them. But the idea here is that they already, I already wrote something that fits it. So I might as well use it. And now I'm going to remind myself of what I call this thing. Da, 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 da. Extraplanar army. So I'm just going to grab this text and pull it into the document if I can. The PDF is being a little iffy, but I think I got it. Okay. So that's all here. I've got it down here to refer to. Is the idea that PCs are attempting to cause the invasion or thwart it. I think I probably want to do this as that the PCs are trying to thwart the invasion. And so the Arcane Vortex is an exploration environment where there's some stuff going on, and then somebody is trying to use the Arcane Vortex to create a planar invasion, right? If we're drawing on influences from something like the Warhammer Fantasy world, right, we could have a cult of the Outer Realms where they want the equivalent of like the Chaos Gods to come and consume the world, and they believe that as servants of these gods, they will be rewarded for kind of rendering this mortal realm, rendering it vulnerable and creating the opportunity for them to invade. Racing clocks. Racing clocks is an option. I think the way I want to do these racing clocks is that they're not going to be a close analog. There's going to be a bigger long-term countdown, and then there will be a close the vortex countdown. But PCs are only going to know to close the vortex or be in a position to close the vortex after other stuff has happened. The goal here is that a GM could use the Arcane Vortex and Planar Invasion environments kind of as their outline or top-down prep for an entire final arc of a campaign, right? The player characters are level 8 or 9 already, and then the Arcane Vortex environment is going to govern possibly more than 10 sessions of play, or it will be in play across that many sessions, even if the player characters are not directly engaging with the vortex that whole time. So right, I want to have some features that include how are the baddies unlocking the vortex, how do the player characters try to close it for good, and then I'm going to want, all right, this is probably a passive, and then I'll want one or more environment features that are cool, weird stuff happening while you are around the vortex, right? And so the advanced guard would be spend 2 fear to summon. And here I'm going to jump back into the SRD, and I'm going to remind myself of the Outer Realms adversary. So we have Outer Realms Abomination, a bruiser, Outer Realms Corruptor, a support, and Outer Realms Thralls, minions. So I would say a bruiser, a support, and support and 2x party size minions. So this is the advanced guard. The arcane vortex is active, and the extraplanar forces can send some creatures through the vortex even before the invasion begins, but it's like the aperture is very small. Here we're thinking Stargate, we're thinking Pacific Rim, we're thinking like, oh yes, there's a gate because of the conjunction of the stars, like in The Witcher or something. This means that whoever is trying to open the vortex can call on reinforcements. It means that the GM can introduce these outer realms right? Strike Team is a little bit too people-y when the way that the Outer Realms creatures have been characterized is more eldritch, cosmic horror-y, right? If we go back and we look at our SRD and we go into motivation and things like that, Outer Realms Abomination, a chaotic mockery of life constantly in flux. Motives and tactics: demolish, devour, undermine. Outer Realms Corruptor, a shifting, formless mass seemingly made of chromatic light. Motives and tactics: confuse, distract, overwhelm. Outer Realms Thrall, a vaguely humanoid form stripped of memory and identity. Right, so we're talking big Cthulhu FaceTime. Incursion from the Outer Realms, right? Yeah, Oh, that is Meg. I have to take this call real quick. Everything is okay. No worries. So, small incursion. Why is that? It says this is misspelled, but it looks right to me. Anyway, we'll come back to it. Good suggestion, DM Rawlings. So this is like just a small force. It's not even a full set of battle points worth of adversaries, probably, right? One bruiser, one support, and 2 times the party size and minions. But the expectation is that in a lot of cases, there's probably going to be some other adversary here. Right, so we're going to look back at our SRD and we're seeing, okay, who else is at tier 4? Right, we could have an Oracle of Doom trying to do this. We could have a Fallen Warlord, our Necromancer. So, nope. Okay. So we've got some stuff here. Is 18 enough? Let's say 19 here. When designing adversary or environment difficulties, I am disinclined to go above 20, except in really extreme cases, because the 2d12 structure of action rolls for player characters trends toward a result of 13. The dice themselves make results that are extreme on either end pretty rare. And so if I have an adversary with a difficulty of 23, it's going to be really hard to succeed consistently. Player characters will be able to succeed, but whether they can do it consistently is very different. By tier 4, a lot of player characters are going to have their high trait at +5. So that is you say we're going to default to a 13 on average, and then we add +5. That's only 18. So then you're going to need to add an experience or some have advantage in some way, and then that gets even trickier if you are in a position where you're rolling not your very best trait. Etten Entertainment asks, is the incursion team that full team of a choice of bruiser support or the minions? Just thinking how BP would play into an environment summon. I know a leader wouldn't affect BP, but is the same said for an environment, or should that just count the environment as battle points? Yeah, the creator of the battle point system has, I believe, in unofficial channels said that the intention was that the battle points budget was across a short rest. There is not official guidance for using an environment or for calculating how an environment impacts battle point system. I use the battle point system more as a double check than as the thing that I don't build toward the battle point system. I build an encounter and then I double check it against battle points is maybe the best way for me to talk about. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't. It just means that when I am doing my design, I do not often start from the place of battle points. I think that for Arcane Vortex, which I'm seeing as a thing that you introduce across a story arc, thinking about battle points for a whole story arc, for me, just goes beyond the scope of how that system was designed. That's my personal approach. Two thralls for each PC. Yeah, I think there are a number of folks who have taken the battle point system and they use it just as the budget for each encounter. And whether you do that for encounter or for a rest is going to depend on your cadence of play, how many combats you expect to have across a long rest, the group's inclination toward more combat or less combat. When I'm GMing Daggerheart, I often end up a little bit on the side of less frequent combat. I think that Daggerheart is less prone to the 15-minute adventuring day in terms of player characters being able to go Nova on foes, and that not being as much of that kind of game as some other fantasy adventure games makes it easier to manage there. But I'm just going to say that for this part of the design, I'm not really thinking about battle points as a primary element. I'm designing stuff and then I'm gut checking against battle points to make sure that it's not like wildly out of pace. If this feature said spend 1 fear to introduce 2 bruisers, 2 supports, a leader, and twice as many thralls as the party size, like, oh, that might be too big for small parties. I have seen environments where when they introduce adversaries, there will be some place for scaling. It'll say introduce X, Y, and Z, and if the party has more than four characters, also add something else so that you have that scaling. The expectation is that the party size is going to be 3 to 5, and then you have scaling on one end, or you reduce the scaling on the low end if you have just like 2 player characters. Many GMs will be able to do that scaling on their own. Having official guidance for it can be really handy, because this is a tier 4 environment, I'm less inclined to feel that I need to do all of that scaling, provide all of that scaling guidance, but sometimes it can be handy to have anyway. To repel those that would stand in the way of the coming invasion. Right, we want to add some theme here. So we're spending 2 fear to summon a small incursion. Right, we don't need to have scout team here. Realms Corruptor. Right, and we're just replacing my notes with the full actual terms, right? Abomination, Corruptor, and Thrall. Abomination, Corruptor, and Thrall. Okay, so for features, we would want to add some flavor text here, right? Like, were they summoned by someone on this side? What is their objective, if anything, beyond sheer destruction? So having some prompts helps us build and ruminate on flavor, right? We're kind of trying to build the feeling of this environment so that it is evocative and easy for someone who picks up this book. They read the Arcane Vortex environment and they go, oh yeah, that's really cool. And then so then we're going to have a feature that is, it's time to switch the environment, right? Double checking my phrasing from the core rulebook, right? We're going to go and look at tier 3, name, environment change, dash thing. Okay. Right, so that is the way we want to do it. So we go here, when the triggers, right? So we probably want a long-term process, and then we want something where if the player characters show up at the vortex, is there something they can do that's just in time, right? Can they stop the invasion just in time? And then if they don't, then we get the full-on invasion, and then that invasion environment governs everything that flows out from the invasion and how do you stop the invasion, right? It might mean that in the invasion you have to kind of do the inverse of how the people that wanted the invasion to happen, how they did a countdown, right? Do you then need to do a new countdown that is resealing the Arcane Vortex? Or do you do something more like Pacific Rim or some other like alien invasion movie where you have to go into the other world and then you do something to make it stop? So we're going to say that this is unstable portal. And we're going from descriptions and vibes into specifics, right? So this vortex sits, this vortex roils and churns from the friction of 2 dimensions right? So the idea is like, oh, okay, there's two dimensions that are right up next to each other, and that this vortex is the representation of that friction. All spellcast rolls within very far of the vortex are made with your fear die is for a spellcast is just going to be a d20 if you are within very far of this unstable portal, because things are all higgledy-piggledy. But that is not how you open it. So we might have this as a baseline passive, and then we have another feature that is select an adversary that wants to open the vortex and initiate a planar invasion as the right. This is kind of how things are described in Divine Usurpation, right? There's the usurper adversary, and then they're trying to do the thing, and then they gain these benefits if that big countdown happens. So we have the instigator. Herald. Let's do instigator to begin with, because I have a warlord's herald in Menagerie #1, and I don't want to necessarily confuse things. That we could have that warlord be the instigator for this arcane vortex for sure. That's definitely an option. When the instigator sets their try not to copy the planner, the Divine Usurpation too closely, but I do want to use some of the same structure. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up that environment and take a look at it. All right, so if we look at one of those core features, let's make this a little bit bigger. No, that didn't do it. Okay. Activate a long-term countdown as the usurper assembles what they need to conduct the ritual. When it triggers, spotlight this environment to use beginning of the end. While this feature remains in play, you can hold up to 15 fear, is what it said. Right? And that's part of why that Divine Usurpation environment works as kind of like an endgame meta structure, because it says, hey, we are in Divine Usurpation time now. Things are happening so that then the GM's fear cap is higher. So I think we can riff on this without feeling too bad about it, right? Because this is just straight up in the SRD, so that's fine. Because we're going to have other stuff that's different in what the Arcane Vortex and then the invasion is going to do, but we're using some of that same structure. And if we parallel the Divine Usurpation, that should make this more legible to someone who has read the core rulebook already. Assembles what they need to open vortex and I'm going to set a long-term countdown because we love long-term countdowns. We love clocks in this household. So this is a long-term countdown 8 in Divine Usurpation. I'm going to call this a long-term countdown 10 because I think I want to emphasize not so much the end, because this vortex represents part 1 rather than part 2, right? The vortex is part 1 of 2. The Divine Usurpation environment is everything all at once. Jota asks, would skill challenges where the party needs to reach X successes before X failures using different approaches, like a chase, for example, be done like an environment with racing clocks? A set of countdowns with a progress countdown against a consequence countdown is, for me, the best way in Daggerheart to replicate or to mechanize that kind of race against the clock, right? Good guys are trying to X before the bad guys can Y. Right? Skill challenge is not a term in Daggerheart, but the skill challenges structure in D&D 4e, and then the way that people have kind of riffed on it for 5e has that cool thing. But then the Daggerheart way of doing it for me is that you have these countdowns, right? So it's not that you need 4 successes, it's that there's 6. It's a countdown of 6, and you can reduce that countdown by 2 with a success with hope, 3 with a crit, 1 with a success with fear, and so on and so forth. And then the consequence countdowns tick down 1 on a success with fear, 2 on a failure with hope, 3 on a failure with fear. GH Leo mentions the homebrew kit for effects and features in kind of homebrewing your own environments and adversaries. That is a very great call out. I was very happy to be asked to work on that homebrew kit, and I hope that is useful for folks. I don't refer to the homebrew kit as often, mostly because while I don't know exactly where it sits with regards to the CGL, is the honest truth. And so I just refer to the version of the homebrew kit that exists in my head. Or I look at it and then come back to stream, versus the SRD stuff I can throw on stream, and that's no problem. Okay, so coming back to this, representing the instigator's efforts, right? And then what does the And here we're doing prompts that are meant to be inspirational and to help the GM decide how they want to have all this kind of stuff. You have to ask, so if you wanted to open the vortex versus close the vortex, would you add it as opposing countdowns? I think that's definitely an option. I haven't decided for sure how I want to do this one, because the overall idea is that the vortex is going to lead to an invasion. I would want to leave space for the player characters to stop the invasion before it begins. But there's a certain degree to which, if you're planning for a planar invasion, if you have a planar invasion ready, you want to be able to do that invasion. But we also want to give the players the chance to have their characters kind of make an impact on the story. So what that makes me, that inclines me toward a version of this exploration environment that makes the invasion very likely, but gives the GM tools to run sequences when the player characters are trying to stop the invasion before it can start. Yeah, I think having two competing countdowns representing control or influence over an environment is a totally solid way of doing things, right? You could have like a social environment where social environment that is like all based around one key event, and then you have a countdown that is a consequence countdown, and when it triggers, the adversaries pin this thing that happened on the player characters, even if they didn't do it. And then there could be a progress countdown that is the player characters convince everybody that they didn't do it. Right? And this is the social environment, and they're making these arguments and they're trying to produce evidence and things like that. There's an example of racing or competing countdowns in the Daggerheart core book when the player characters are trying to convince, I think, a baron or baroness to send some troops based on things that they had encountered. So you can do it that way. Here, I think I probably want a big countdown and then a small countdown. Right? When the big countdown is done, you do the small countdown, and then the small countdown is the one that has an opposing countdown. Dean Rawling asks, I do wonder if there's a way to make it easier for the PCs to solve the incursion the better they do with the first phase. Absolutely. I think that is a cool approach, right? We want to figure out what do we track or keep, what do we make note of or change in environment number 1 to have that impact on environment number 2. In the divine usurpation environment, right, the usurper gets a certain number of bonus fear, and then they can spend that fear to like consume gods and take their power. And so that's a bit where there's like an input from part of the environment to another part of the environment, and then scales some of how that operates. When this countdown triggers, we could absolutely turn this into a 3-phase environment. And what that would be is an environment for all the preparations, an environment for opening or closing the vortex, and then an environment for the invasion. By splitting it out into 3, the vortex environment itself could be all about opening and closing. And then the first environment is more like an arc-long event environment that is the instigator's efforts to prepare for a planner invasion. And I may end up going in that direction, which would be interesting. It's tricky because it's offering more resources in one particular area. What if you wanted the last arc of your game to be about this thing? So it's deeper rather than wide in terms of the resources that it provides to a group, right? And if I'm doing an environments book that's 20 something to 30 environments, and I have 3 that are all one sequence, that's 10% of the book that's only about one particular thing. But maybe that's fine. I don't know. Part of why I wanted to do this stream is that I knew I needed to make these high-tier environments, and that I hadn't decided all of the things of how I wanted to do them, what I wanted to do with them, and things like that. So I could talk through it with you all. Right. Unleash. All right, so we should just do the stars are right. we do this, when the stable portal countdown triggers, the instigator travels to the vortex and begins opening the gate to connect, allow right, here we are. Stars are right, begins, right, set a consequence countdown. So now we had big countdown, and now we have little countdown, right? It's not so much the numbers make it big or little, but this is a consequence countdown, not a long-term countdown, right? Long-term countdowns generally tick down by 1 once a long rest. A consequence countdown ticks down based largely on results of dice rolls, right? You want to try to close it before the consequences tick down. And a progress countdown and if there are forces trying to keep the vortex sealed, set a progress countdown representing the effort to close the vortex for good. And so if we have our progress countdown here, and the consequence countdown finishes, we go, okay, consequence finished, we get an invasion. We can then take however many steps were completed in this progress countdown, and we can use that as an output to change or impact some things in the planner invasion, right? We might have a countdown in the invasion environment be based on how much is left in here, right? We might say you set a progress countdown equal to the final value of this countdown from over here, or that value plus X, right? If it's 4 plus the remaining value of the progress countdown, and you had it as a 10, it's like, oh, that's a 14. That's going to be a lot of work. And while you're doing it, all these other things are happening. But if you just fell short and your progress countdown was at 2, then the progress countdown for closing the gate after the invasion has started might only be a 6. And that's going to be a lot easier, right? Some of the party is fighting off the invaders as they're streaming in, and some of the party is trying to do the ritual. What I might do when the gates slam open and magical power floods the entire area, forcing the PCs to retreat. The idea here is if the invasion happens, I don't know that I want it to be the same scene for the PCs to close the gates. Again, because I'm trying to think about something that is the scale of a whole campaign or the scale of a whole arc at the end of a campaign. So it might be that I want something that's a bit more hard framed in saying, hey, you failed to keep the invasion from happening. Now you need to fall back and regroup. Exactly how I want to do that wording TBD because this feature is already running a bit long, right? So that's making me, the way this is going is pushing me toward the idea of actually doing 3 environments. I don't want to do that just yet because I want to get some of the core elements of the invasion is here environment decided before we wrap up. Because I don't want to go too much longer than an hour, but I do want to, even if I don't give you the whole picture, I do want to give a sense of a major step of the process, right? Kind of a rough concept-y draft of both of these. Right, Close for Good is kind of already covered by The Stars Are Right. So let me get rid of this. But the other thing to do here is while this feature, I'm just going to have this be 15 fear as well. I don't think this is necessarily how it's written in the core rulebook, but it might make sense to do that anyway. Yeah, while this environment remains in play, you can hold up to 15 fear. I mean, that's fine. I think that's clear enough in the core book, so no need to try to fancy up beyond that. I am going to split these up a little bit because it's a little bit easier for me to interpret it. Right, we don't have the feature text for Unstable Portal just yet, but that's fine. How do we talk about the environment shift itself? Then shift to the X environment and spotlight it. Great. Let's see, it was how many fear? It was 2 fear for the siege. And how many fear does the GM gain from Divine Usurpation completing? Gain a fear for each unmarked HP the usurper has. Right, okay. I think this fear gain is not going to be based on, well, equal to the remaining value of the progress countdown. Right, so this progress countdown of 10 to try to shut the gate. The less anyone has tried to kind of shut the gate, the more powerful and the bigger the initial wave of invasion is. So the PCs are absolutely going to want to try to kind of close the aperture as much as they can while this final ritual is happening. And the better they do, the better off they are for this next step, because adding 10 fear is a lot, right? If the GM could add 10 fear at the end of the sequence, then during that sequence they can spend fear pretty aggressively, knowing that when they hit that trigger, they're going to regain a bunch of fear all at once. That does, I think, incline toward going immediately into the invasion and not doing the PCs have to pull back thing. So I'm kind of thinking in ways that are a little bit pushing and pulling against one another. So that's something I'm going to have to figure out. So impulses, and then difficulty, potential adversaries, right? And this is nests. This isn't the core rulebook, so I can be cheeky like this, right? There's a planar invasion. You know what's going to happen? People are going to be distracted. And so that faction that you beat but did not destroy from earlier might try to take this as an opportunity, take the opportunity to do some big thing that they wouldn't have been able to do if the player characters could put their whole attention on this. This kind of a thing is how you could turn the invasion into something that lasts across like 4, 5, 6, 10 sessions, and not just it's open and now we need to close it in the same scene, right? Here we're thinking this is the difference between, I don't know if I have the other reference, but in the 2012 movie The Avengers, so spoilers for that if you care, Loki opens a portal to the Chitauri world, and then the Chitauri have these big ships that start invading. Later that same day, like half an hour to an hour later, right, they close that portal. Maybe we don't say that that's the same scene. It's the sequence. It's the end sequence, even if it's not the same scene, but it's the same day. It's not, we open this portal and then a week later we close it. So the other option, right? The two models I have in my head are the Avengers, and then the other one is, and unfortunately the way that I've framed it then means that you're kind of going to know this spoiler as well, the TV show Gravity Falls. I'll give you a moment if you don't want to hear the details. At the end of season 2, we have the weird apocalypse where Gravity Falls is kind of taken into / opened up to kind of a weird outer realmsy dimension. And that trio of last episodes takes place over the course of a week, more than a week, something like that. That's more what I'm thinking in terms of the timing for these, because that gives more room for the player characters to breathe and take in what it means to be living in a planar invasion, right? There's a version of this where I could take the 3 environment version, build it out, and say, this is a tier 4 adventure, right? This will take you 15 sessions to do, because we're going to have basically 3 story arcs. We're going to have the preparation arc. We're going to have get to and try to stop the opening of the gate arc, and then the what happens once the gate is already opened arc. Now your player characters might keep the gate from being opened. Who knows what you could do then, right? There was another place, there's a few different options you have if you really want to use that last arc's worth of stuff. But some of that gets into what is your table culture in terms of how much agency the player characters are meant to have over the story versus how much the GM is like, hey, I prepared this stuff. I want you to be able to experience how cool this stuff, the elements that I prepped in this planar invasion story is. So that's TBD and outside the scope of this particular stream. And so what I want to use here is I want to riff on my extraplanar army stat block, right? World Eater Locusts. If no meaningful opposition remains within very far, the army consumes all natural forces in the area, gain a fear, and the army clears all stress and HP. So that's going to do... Jaybird Thing says, I know we're out of scope, but that last bit being a planar pushback where the PCs venture beyond to prevent any future incursions could be fun. Yeah, for sure, right? The more granular we make the environments that we're using, the more focused they can be, and the more of a sense of progression we could have. Something like this can easily lead toward an adventure design paradigm where there is a lodestone environment for each major beat in the campaign, right? So you could have preparation for the invasion, opening the portal, and then if you succeed in opening the portal, you move to planar invasion, and from planar invasion you can maybe move to pushback. If you keep the portal from closing, you don't go to planar invasion. You maybe instead go to like an environment that's about the world, like world potentially being unmade, right? Because the door has been shut, but this tension is still happening. And so you could have a whole different kind of a thing, and you end up with two options for your end state, but you're using different environments, and there's different elements or NPCs or plot beats that you might play out with that. That is operating at a really high scale in a way that's interesting to me, but is again out of scope. So maybe we'll come back around. If a few months go by and I haven't done anything with this, folks are welcome to remind me on a stream or over on YouTube or Patreon to maybe come back around. This might be an interesting way to build on my adventure design series that I have done a few streams of. Of course, I'm thinking a lot about adventure design because I'm working on the Dungeons of Drakkenheim Daggerheart campaign guide, which I can't really talk about publicly because of the NDA, but I think it's very fair for me to say that it's a thing I've been thinking about and that I don't give you any details. So, right, and then there's a feature that's about being able to close the vortex again. Right. The name I want to give this is Hell on Earth, but it's extraplanar, not an invasion from the circles below. Right. I'm just going to give it the tentative title of Weird Mageddon because that's my touchstone here. Hell on all Earths is good, right? I think in a progression of environments idea, this kind of Weird Mageddon-esque feature would include something like the fear cap is even higher, right? The fear cap was 15 for the setup event, and then when the worst has come to pass, maybe the fear cap goes even higher. 18. The trick there is if the fear cap is so high, what are you spending fear on, right? Some should be fear features that are higher in cost, and some would be more fights more frequently where the adversaries have more fear backing them. So one of the other things to do should be big fear feature. Number 1, big fear feature. Number 2, question mark. Right? Maybe a land unmade is one of those big features. And this is, oh, well, the invasion is happening and these creatures are from another realm and their mere presence is rewriting reality in the mortal realm and creating these problems, right? And then big fear feature number 2 might be some other thing. You know, is that about the armies of the outer realms? Is it about something else, right? Because Consume All Life is already going to be about the armies of the outer realms. Then closing the vortex, this reaction, countdown, length of countdown relates to the countdown from the vortex opening, closing environment. Massive magical pressure, flow of power, right? Once the aperture is open, there's all this magical extra dimensional power that's streaming through. And if you're trying to close it, right, you're probably having to contend with that overwhelming magical power. So that's going to do something, right? It's going to make your rolls harder, or it's going to mean that you have to mark a stress every time you make an action roll, or something like that. Yeah. Do the invaders have ships or vessels? You could borrow the thing from end of Baldur's Gate 3. Yes, absolutely. In the part of the trick with environments is avoiding or constraining scope. In how concise a manner can we convey something that could easily be expanded out? And when we are doing our environment design, what scope do we want to set for it? How zoomed in or zoomed out do we want to be? It can't, or the impulse to zoom out and have a bunch of small environments that each do a very special thing, and then you have a bigger thing, is very understandable. If I'm trying to create one set of 3 environments that give you tools to use across 10 sessions, I have to be thinking big picture, so that if there was a feature that was about the invaders' ships or vessels, it would have to be, I would want it to be pretty broad in how it is deployed, rather than having, okay, and here is the stat block for there is an outer dimensional ship attacking a town, right? I might not even have a stat block for the ship. The threat of the ship might be covered by the invasion, and I could say the invasion, in the invading force, there are 6 of these big ships. And then that's a countdown. And here's a difficulty on how to destroy a ship, right? You could do a group action roll that was the player characters destroy or take over one of these ships, because the scale of your action is very flexible. And for me, Daggerheart, design-wise, leaves space for that flexibility. The trick is when you are abstracting something that could be resolved through combat, right, where dice rolls are leading to damage rolls, and damages and thresholds come into play, abstracting that part of play pulls you away from these other aspects of the game's design, and that can create a tension, because a lot of characters have features that manifest in that damage and thresholds kind of space. And so you can pull away from other parts of the system when you're operating in that bit of a remove. And that's something that I have to keep in mind, because my inclination a lot of times is to pull back and to let the resolution system cover a bigger part, a larger scale narratively in terms of what it's addressing. But as a big fear cost, here is a big ship of extraplanar invaders. Absolutely a solid option. In the version of this that was a module, I would definitely say you could have a feature that was, for fear, a ship comes through the portal. Here's all the details about what that involves. I would probably also then have rules that are like how the player characters go and find allies in the setting to array those forces against the invaders. And now we're almost at something like a Mass Effect scale. Like, we're not doing space fleets, but we are sort of doing army scale storytelling. But again, constraining scope. Category 5 kaiju, indeed, right? Like, you go to the gnomes who have built a 120-foot tall war machine that gets deployed against the kind of the legally distinct nautiluses. Nautiloids? Something like that. Anyway, that I think is covering our scope to the point where we can wrap up, because from here it's really easy to get bigger in scope, to go, okay, instead of 3 we're going to do 5, or instead of 3 we're going to do 3 environments, but then we're also going to have a take down one of the invader ship environments that's like an event, or maybe it's a traversal. I want to keep from doing that because I have too many other projects to work on right now. And one of them being moving. So what I think this does is, even if I keep this at 2 environments, I've got a lot of core material. We've thought through some important elements. We've laid out sketches of where different features are going to go and what kind of thing they are supposed to do. I've pulled in this extraplanar army stat block and been thinking about how to build on existing work from the Menagerie #1. And so I think that is going to do it for today, because I could easily take a short break here, come back, and we could work for another hour and a half, but I need to do other things. I have to prep for a playtest game that I'm doing a session 0 of tonight, which is for testing new character classes that I've been working on and the inspiration deck idea. So many projects, trying to juggle a bunch of things. Thank you so much to everybody who has been here to ask questions and suggest ideas in developing these environments. So thank you to Jota P. Corvuja, DM Rawlings, Lord Soulwolf, Jaybird Things. Let's see who else is here. GH Leo, Adventure Lies Ahead, Etten Entertainment, and everybody else who has come by to watch live. Thank you to the folks who are watching on VOD over on Twitch or on YouTube. As a reminder, if you watch these streams and have not gone over to my Patreon, I would invite you to go over there, take a look, and see if there is a backer level that works for you and your budget. On Patreon, I have a bunch of work in progress materials for Daggerheart compatible adversaries and environments like this, but like fully written out. I have a bunch of stuff to support a campaign playing the Witherwild campaign frame. I've got the inspiration deck, which is a cool, weird deck builder subsystem you can add on top of Daggerheart, right? A bunch of Daggerheart compatible stuff, a number of essays about game design and RPGs more broadly, and if you like science fiction fantasy, a number of years of Patreon material that's about science fiction fantasy prose as a writer and somebody working in the business. So the Patreon backlog is big, especially if your interests extend into the world of science fiction fantasy prose writing. So that's all that. Thank you again to everyone. And now we're going to go to the ending thing, and I will see you maybe not next week, maybe not the week after, but definitely before the end of March, unless things go really wrong. So fingers crossed everything goes well in the move, and I am back to do more streaming with you all sooner rather than later. Take care.